Welcome to Licking Non-Vanilla, a sex-positive hour of talk about kink, sexual mores, and writing dirty words. So grab a cup of cocoa, your favorite easy chair, and the lube as we go sailing into the dark, sweet waters of all things naughty. On Licking Non-Vanilla with your hosts, Ralph Greco Jr. and M. Christian.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another amazing and exciting edition of Licking Non-Vanilla. I'm Ralph Greco Jr., here somewhere in the wilds of New Jersey, and across the aisle from me is my intrepid partner, and his name is...
Chris, otherwise known as M. Christian, from the equally wilds of Eugene, Oregon.
And we may be across the country from each other, but we're not across our hearts. We're right next to each other that way.
Absolutely.
And we're just going to give you another version episode of what we try to do here, right?
Exactly.
Right. And trying to keep it. I guess today we're gonna get into the sex writing biz a little bit, as we determined before we just came on the air, and I always think about, with this podcast, trying to keep it as interesting to a wide variety of people as possible. But we also do come from a certain place, and I guess that's the writing place. So that's something we are comfortable talking about and relating it to the world in general, if we can. Right? Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. Completely agree. I mean, it's one of those things that's like, this isn't for everybody, but at the same time, a lot of it really kind of, can be, because it's there's a lot of things people don't understand about being a writer versus what the reality is and that kind of stuff.
Right. And we all know that, like you just said, that's a good point. The reality of it is sometimes drastically different than the people's idea of it. Almost a romanticized version of what it is. And we both know it's not always romantic at all times. But we've been over this before. We've been over our history a little bit, how we got into it and stuff. But I always wonder about this, because I know about myself. When you began writing way back, before electricity was invented, just like me. What kind of stuff were you writing initially, do you think?
Well, I mean, when I kind of like decided to be a writer in high school, and then it was kind of like a light bulb thing went off. I mean, it's like I wasn't one of those people who had tried. I mean, I've always been creative, and for some reason, it's like I'm going to be a writer, and failed miserably for like 10 years. But mostly, I was kind of writing, kind of like, I guess you could call it kind of avant-garde allegorical science fiction. I mean, I probably wrote like 50, 60 stories, over like 8 or 10 years, and I still have some of them. They're in a box in the closet. But it's kind of one of those things. It's like, I think I was probably, under the impression of, how this actually operates. And so I was really way too narrowly focused on only one genre, as opposed to like, trying other things.
Because that was the one genre you were seriously into.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right. Well, it makes sense. I mean, I think most people, as we grow older, I can certainly speak for myself. As I grow older, my interests in a whole bunch of stuff, reading a whole bunch of stuff, it's increased. It's certainly opened up over the years. But when I was younger, I was a stone cold sci-fi guy, And I think you're right. I think my first foray into trying stuff was probably fantasy or science fiction, because that's what I was in.
Exactly.
Yeah. Did either of your folks or your brother, I know you have a brother, did anybody write other than you?
No. My dad was an engineer, and my mother was an interior decorator, which is where I think I got the creative side of things.
Right.
My brother was much more of a visual artist than writing. I was the only one who really kind of caught the writing bug. But it's like it was a unique experience, because my parents weren't exactly all that supportive. So I just kind of like did this on my own, and not to like, say, oh, things would have been better if, but, I think I probably would have made a little bit more progress if I, had like realized a bunch of things about being a writer. But, you learn and you grow from there. What about your folks and your family?
Well, my dad is a great audience. He's a great fan of creative stuff. Like he loved music, and but ironically, he's not a big reader. In fact, I don't know if I think my father's read a handful of books in his life, but he's smart in a multitude of ways, and but like I said, he really does appreciate the arts. My mother is the reader. She's a voracious reader, and I think I learned that early on. I remember I can distinctly remember Dr. Seuss books coming to the house when I was a kid, and I have those books still, and I open them up, and they give me such a rush of. It's almost like that, the Proust story, like with the mandolin, like it just sends me back immediately. So my connection to books and literature goes way back, and I think my mother's influence was, like I said, she was a big reader. So, but neither of them write.
Cool. It's wonderful.
But neither of them write, and my sister doesn't write. Well, she does write, but I mean, not professionally, and she's a good reader as well. So. Reading was very valued in the family, very a big thing. And then I just early on just gravitated towards, like, I'm wondering about you too in school. Did you find you were doing much better in the English courses than you ever did in the math courses?
It's weird. It's like, I don't think teachers knew what to do with me because I was such a determined little twit around, writing. It's like, when you have like, teachers who are like in high school or even early college who just, most writing classes are kind of like easy A kind of things.
Yeah.
And I just kind of sashayed in there and said, I'm going to write like a story a week until I get published. They just didn't know what to do with me. But, I had a couple of good teachers. I had, a couple bad teachers.
Right.
But, by and large, it's kind of like, it really is kind of, you read books and you read interviews, and so forth. And you get a little bit of it, but a lot of it really is kind of crash course kind of stuff.
But in school, did you find you gravitated more towards the English courses? Just in general, like you had more of an aptitude towards that?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. It's like I've always considered myself kind of self-taught in English because, I have dyslexia, so it's hard to process some of this stuff. So, it's like, but it's funny. It's like I did art and I did a lot of like design work and such, but mostly it was creative writing rather than like actually English itself.
Right,
but it's kind of interesting how that goes.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think that I remember early on in high school too. I was reading stuff that was a little above where I was, grade wise, because I was a good reader. And I remember reading. Have you ever read Spoon River Anthology? Spoon River Anthology is kind of a good. I think it's Edgar Lee Masters, and it's a book of poems. It's kind of like an Our Town kind of thing. The people in the each person has their own poem of their life. But cool. What's interesting about Spoon River Anthology is all the people are dead. They're all in the cemetery. So they're all talking about their lives, right? And I remember going into my junior creative writing course with a really good teacher. By high school, if you're starting to split up into those courses, usually you're getting teachers that are into those courses, So I remember walking into class, and this was after like we had like some sort of like they had like those book drives where you'd buy a couple books, and then come in anyway. So I had that. And I don't know what I had, but anyway, I had Spoon River Anthology I'm walking around with, and my teacher. I remember my teacher saying to me, "You're reading Spoon River Anthology?" And I said, "Yeah." And he was kind of like impressed that like it was a little bit off the pale, other than like Moby Dick, which we were reading at that point, right? And he was surprised that I was reading that. And I got lucky in senior year; they had a science fiction reading course in high school.
Oh, cool!
So we did all the the great science, which were books I had read already, 451 and Animal, all the stuff we'd read about it. By that point, If and 1984, all the stuff that you and I probably read years ago. But that was cool because like I already had a leg up on all those other kids who were just getting introduced to that stuff, But those books were very important to me. I remember, The Lord of the Rings being really, really important, like super important. I don't know if did you get into Lord of the Rings when it was?
No,
no,
it's no. I never. Fantasy never worked for me. I did read some, like Once and Future King, and a bunch of other ones, but mostly it was pretty much science fiction. Quite a bit of horror, especially when it. blew up in the 80s. I read a ton of that.
Right.
Mostly with science fiction, some mysteries as well.
Okay.
Even a smattering of westerns and other little things. But fantasy's never been one of my big things. So it's like it's interesting to see how we divert from that. But that's really a great story. I mean, it's like you're so lucky to have that that kind of experience. And you're right. It's like I think it's always kind of a sign of writers that they are often interested in books or such that are like above their pay grade, so to speak, when they're in school.
Yeah.
And one thing that's also interesting I'm pointing out is that I'm pretty much just a writer. I mean, it's like I dabble in like certain other kinds of art, but it's purely just fun.
Right.
But you're also an accomplished musician and a playwright. I think that's really interesting how you can like take like different creative approaches to things.
Well, we've talked about this before, actually, and somebody was talking about this the other day to me. Yeah, to me, it's all writing. It's all, whether it's the songwriting or whether it's whatever it is, it's all right. So when people say, well, what are you? What you do? I always say, first and foremost, I'm a writer, because that's how I look at it, But yeah, I don't know. My mother's also a musician. My mother plays piano, and she has a very good voice. So I think that helped, that certainly helped cultivate my musical abilities. But most people that I know, certainly the one thing that comes true all the time, regardless of your background or anything, is if you're a writer, you're usually a reader. And we've said this no matter what, if you're reading genre fiction or whatever it is. But most times we have found, even in the classes we teach, right, when people say to us, well, how do you become a writer? What do you do? And we're always flippant. We're not really flippant, but our answer is always this, well, you got to start writing. Other than that, I don't know what else to tell you. But
exactly.
That's first and foremost. But the other thing we always tell people too, you gotta make sure you read. You gotta seek out that too, because I don't know anybody who's a writer who doesn't read. I don't know. I guess there are some cases, but I would think they are few and far between.
Cool. I mean, that's exactly it. I mean, it really is. I mean, it's like you need to write a lot and you need to read a lot. Yeah, I think that's the two. And it's like you don't necessarily need to read also in the genre you're trying to write in, though it's a really good idea.
Yeah, right. That's true.
You can just read anyway, because I mean that's how you learn as a writer. It's like you learned by like you read an author you like or a book you read, you particularly enjoyed, and you think I want to try and do that, or you learn how they do it, and so you kind of like copy, not plagiarize, but just kind of like try and do what they do. It's like I remember an interview with some writer. And they said, the interviewer said, you have a very unique style. And the author responded, well, it's not that unique because, my descriptions come from Dickens, my dialogue comes from Raymond Chandler or something like this. And it's like, and that's really kind of the way it goes. You just kind of like, you learn by studying and experience, and you kind of assemble your own style out of it.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I think and it becomes like a Frankenstein process, and then you get better at something, and you kind of figure and it takes time to find your own voice, even. I think we're always working towards that anyway, to fine tuning it,
Absolutely, and sometimes it takes like a couple different styles. Like, I think if you become to appreciate like certain writers. It's like you find that like I'm going to do this story in this voice or that voice, or there's certain kinds of different voices you can experiment with, because that's the other thing. You know what you're good at until you try it and either fail or succeed.
Right. And, and also we've both been in this position where a genre or whatever doesn't work for us for a while, and we can come back to it. And sometimes your sensibilities change, or your talents, your skills, you get better at certain things, and you hone your skills, and then you can again try some. Because I could never have done playwriting until I did it. I think. I wasn't ready for it. I didn't know enough. Not even the mechanics of it, of how to, lay out a play on a page. Just the sensibility of it. It took a certain, same with, I find, and I don't know if you find this, short story writing is probably what we do most of. But I find that to be quite challenging. Short story writing, because anybody will tell you it's you got to pack a lot into a little space.
Absolutely. And I want to throw a compliment, actually. Not you don't deserve more, but because I've dabbled in screen and playwriting, and I have to say that's not easy. I don't know how you do it. I mean, one of these days I'm going to tie you to a chair and make you tell me, because it's like it's one of those things I just simply have a hard time dealing with.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking that tie me to a chair. It's a normal Friday night for you and me, but anyway,
exactly, it's normal Friday night.
I don't know. Again, I think it was one of those things that, people say this to us all the time too. How do you guys do this? How do you, especially now, we talk about the erotica too, which is a very specific form of writing. People find that's almost like alchemy to people. Like, how do you not only how do you write, but how do you take all that naughty, sexy stuff that's in your head and put it on the page, and not only that, make it hot for somebody else, and I think it's just a matter of doing, right?
Exactly. I mean, everybody has their own motivations. I mean, sometimes it's you like the process. Sometimes it's, you like getting published. Sometimes it's like, I want to get paid.
Thank you.
So it's like everybody has some kind of different motivations. And it's kind of like you got to sort of discover what your drive is. And, it can be very daunting because, especially when you're first starting out. I mean, getting paid and that whole other side of things isn't really there. So you sort of need to find what works for you. But again, it's like, as long as you write, that's all that matters. I mean, that's why it's like, when you're first starting out, fan fiction or just whatever you want to do is a great idea, because just to keep you going.
Yeah. And we've said this more than once. We said it on another show, and we said this all the time. Just do it. Like, don't worry about what it's going to be and the form of it. And, is this going to be a novel? Is this going to be a short story? Just get it out of you first and foremost. And, then if you get to a business point of view, like we are at, where our writing is what brings in the cash, and sometimes not enough of it. But when that happens, it becomes a matter of like, well, then you're going to have to think about the mechanics of the work about it, not just the actual just doing the work, but how to market and how to get the work and what you should do and all that stuff that goes into anybody's work. I mean, like if you made pizzas and you were like, and I want to open a pizzeria. Well, it's not just making the pizzas, right? Not just a formula, a menu, and all that, laying out a menu and getting together what you do best. It would also be, well, how am I going to make this pizzeria profitable? So you and I, being professional writers, and any professional writers out there, you have to think about, okay, how do I make this profitable? So that's the other, and that I believe, and we were just talking about ideas for this show today, and that's the other side of the coin that I believe the mystique of it goes away then, because you're like, okay, now I got to sit down and really think about this, and that's when we I don't know if we bristle against, but we definitely have a different viewpoint where we go, this is where it becomes a job now, and you have to approach it that way, and that's this. Talk about something that's the same across the board for everybody. If you're going to try to pursue a job in any kind of way, whether it's your life or your career, and I am rambling way too much here, but whether it becomes, whatever it becomes in your life, and however it gets there or you get there, you have to consider that part of it. And I think, and that's where it becomes the same across the board, no matter what you're doing.
Exactly. And you're completely correct. It's like, when you're first starting out and you're just writing, just write. That doesn't matter. Don't worry about anything. Just write. And that could take anything from a year to a long time. I mean, it's a big decision to put your work out there. And I think too often that there's this kind of push when people talk about being a writer, they automatically, and it's natural, you have a fantasy, and media definitely, reinforces that. To like automatically go for like being a published writer and so forth. But there's a big step there. And, when you're first starting out, your story is going to suck. That's the way it works. I mean, it's like every first story sucks, and every second story sucks, and every third story sucks. And then the next one gets a little better and so forth. So, it's kind of more important, I think, to like get comfortable in your writer's skin, before actually going out there. But when you go out there, it is a job. I mean, you need to do it well. I think you need to do it, really have a discipline about it, and not just in writing, but just taking it seriously. I mean, if there's a lot to juggle and a lot to manage, and it's one of the things. It's like, I don't know about you. I'm really curious to hear what you say about this, but I always kind of like, you mentioned bristle. I bristle when writers talk about a career. See, it's like when you're in a normal job, you have a career. You can say, okay, I'm going to be the top salesperson, then the regional manager, and then, so forth. You can't do that when you're a writer because writing just sort of often happens. You can't decide I'm going to be a best-selling author. That's
Right.
out of your control.
No, you can't. What are you talking about? I always thought you could.
Can't do it. Can't do it. So it's like, I just think that it's better to say, writers have lives that happen to them, as opposed to a career.
Right. No, I agree. Yeah, I agree. I don't. First of all, let's just give a shout out to where we are and who we are. This is Ralph Greco Jr. That's M. Christian over there, and you're listening to Licking Non-Vanilla. So I just want to let you know this is Licking Non-Vanilla podcast, and we're talking today we're delving deep into the writer life, and everything Chris has just said. I mean, there is not a difference, but there is a hierarchy to being, starting the writing and doing the writing and then doing it as your business. And then, the next step would be, and this is where we become specific here, is doing the kind of, conducting and engaging in genre writing. And then that's another step. And then the genre of erotica, which is, good and bad, filled with pitfalls and high points, like anything else, and like any business that you get into. But I think Chris will agree that we kind of fell into that as well. That just happened. It happened. You were talking about writers live their life and it happens, and I think that's what happened. And we're not especially unusual perverts. I mean, we can be paid. I mean, we will get there. And I don't think particularly. I mean, if you met Chris and I, you would think we were pretty normal blokes, as far as just going through the world and liking the things we like and interacting with people and all that kind of stuff. So I don't think that you would find erotica writers to be on the spectrum of any kind of way. I mean, yes, some are, right? Or to be overtly perverse, and some are. But I think generally we're just, we're like most other people in that we write a certain kind of stuff, and that may set us apart.
Yep. Completely agree. I completely agree. I mean, it's like, again, it has to do how you approach it. I mean, it's funny, but it's like, you're right. It's like, when you look at a lot of erotica writers, they just look like everybody else. I do think there is kind of like a subdivision where people, they write specifically erotica as a form of activism, which is, that's not, it's not good or bad. It's just simply, that's kind of like the different approach to it. Yeah. And you and I like consider ourselves kind of like, noble hacks that, it's not so much an activism, though we do try and be as inclusive and respectful as possible. And just really do honor to what we're writing about. But it's basically a venue. It's something to do. So it's like there is a kind of different approach to things. I'm not too sure whether there's any benefit or drawback to either one. They're both just different.
I mean, we know people that do both, and we know people that have taken their writing to a level where they don't write really anymore as much as they lecture, or they do classes or whatever it happens to be. Chris and I kind of dip our toe into all of it, but I think he would agree that it is the writing first and foremost.
Absolutely.
But there are people that have, that wrote for a long time and don't anymore because it led them into another arena, whether that's giving live classes or they own a shop or they're a publisher. There's a million things that happen, But with erotica, I think it's definitely, in some instances, it's the redheaded stepchild, because people have a certain view of it because it's salacious. But you and I both know, we know plenty of people who are either in the porn business because they're actors or actresses, or they're in the porn business because they run a website, or they're in the porn business because they film content. And they are all just everyday people. They just do a job.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think people are under the impression that, wow, anything that gets laced with sex in some way must be really beyond the pale and unusual. And you and I say all the time, it's kind of what everybody's into and does in their own kind of way. We just happen to write about it.
Exactly. You're completely correct. It's like, again, it has to do with how they approach it and, for them, what it is. I mean, it's funny because it's like, I'm not too sure about you, Rafi, but it's like, it's like when people talk about, like we mentioned before, people who are like, this is a calling and this is something important they do is sort of a form of activism. It's like, I can relate that really well because for me, writing is the turn on. It's not necessarily particularly, about sex. So I enjoy writing about sex. It's because I enjoy writing. So for me, the turn on is someone calling me up or sending me an email saying, hey, can you do, 2,500 words of gay cowboy stories or something like this? And my first reaction is, I get to write. I get to be paid for it. I mean, it's like, that's the turn on. I mean, it just.
Yeah, no, first and foremost. Absolutely first and foremost. I think that when I'm happiest, I think when I'm in the middle of doing that. When I'm either revising or whatever it is, but I'm happiest then because I'm doing the work, you know. And I think it's true. Yeah, for most people who like to write, who that's their thing, I would say, and I think that's true of anybody. Like people who are say landscapers, the most important thing for them is the actual get their hands in the dirt. Right, that's when they're happiest. I mean, your end result is great to look at a beautifully outfitted garden, or to look at a short story that you accomplished something. But the actual work itself, no matter what work you do, is what's most important.
Exactly.
But the state of erotica, though, and we talked about this before, that's kind of the problem for us now because, like Chris just said, to get an assignment is a wonderful thing. And Chris and I would say both of us lately have been paid more for our nonfiction than anything else. Wouldn't you say,
correct?
Chris?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, the whole anthology world back in the 90s and 2000s is kind of pretty much collapsed. It's still around.
Right.
And you can find call for submissions for various things. And for a while there, it was also like, websites or so forth. And I've seen a couple that are, you're looking for erotic content. But for the most part, it's really the nonfiction that does it. Because for one thing, it's usually more stable. Because, it's usually when you write for a certain place, you can send them like several pitches and then they'll pick one or they'll give you an assignment. Yeah. And then it usually kind of snowballs from there because you establish a relationship with them. And after a certain amount of time, you can sort of get in this kind of rhythm where, article goes up on the website, you get paid, you send another pitch and so forth. You can't do that with stories. Stories are kind of like, they exist and they're popped out there and then you're that kind of relationship might move, but it doesn't have that same kind of rhythm. And frankly, nonfiction pays better. I mean, short stories pay anything 5 to maybe 50 or more. Articles can run anything from $50 to $200, depending, even more. And for the same amount of work. I mean, nonfiction kind of, and it's not better or worse. It's just a different mindset, to how to do it. Because when you're writing fiction, of course, you have to be more, precise. You can't just make shit up.
Right.
And there's a certain rules how to do it, and every site's different. When you write fiction, of course, it's pretty much fair game, but that also makes it a problem because, if your story doesn't have no work for someone, it gets rejected, and you have no idea why. I mean, it could be anything. But yeah, it's kind of apples and oranges. But yeah, nonfiction really is kind of like the way to go.
Yeah, and that's how we probably. I mean, I got lucky at a couple instances. I was writing for a sex toy shop that I don't believe they're in business anymore. But it's actually around the time you and I met, I got this gig. And they wanted short pieces of fiction. I'm talking like maybe a page, if not, if maybe two. And what they wanted was their products to be name dropped in the fiction. So it was like, you'd have a story about a Pyrex. They wanted to push the Pyrex dildo this week. So the story would be about a couple using that piece of equipment, and that's what they wanted. So I, in that instance, I got to do kind of both, serve two masters. I was writing about a product specifically, but I was writing about it within the context of fiction, which was pretty interesting. I got to say, it was a lot of fun to do it that way. But usually you don't get that thing happening. Usually it's one or the other, and the fiction, unfortunately, is a drying up market. You know, like Chris just said about anthos, and what he means by that is anthologies, which means it's a book that someone is publishing about, usually centered around a certain theme. Wouldn't you say, Chris?
Yes, exactly. Yes.
So they're looking for erotica that takes place on Mars, or robot spanking stories. As we got to start. We got to write a book about that. We talk about it all the time. And they publisher will put out a call for that, and you send in a story, and usually get paid a minimum fee. You don't usually make a residual off the book when it's sold, do you, Chris?
Yeah. No, not really. I mean, not very often. I mean, every blue moon, there'll be something where you get a share of the royalties or something similar. But by and large, it's usually a flat rate. And it's usually a flat amount, like $25, $50, $75, or it's based on the number of words. So if it's like, a penny a word versus like 8 cents a word, which is a really high rate, and they're also sometimes very, like you mentioned before, for anthologies, are very specific. So you can't just simply write about Mars if the book's designed for a queer audience or a not queer audience, or if it's not BDSM or it is BDSM. So it sometimes can be really, really kind of laser specific. And there's usually a deadline too for submissions, and it'll be they'll send us like no submissions after this point or something similar.
And just again, you're at Licking Non-Vanilla, just so you know, the podcast with M. Christian or Chris. Well, it's Chris to his friends, so you have to call him M. Christian, and me, Al Greco Jr. But it's funny too, Chris. And Chris and I mean, we get on the phone probably a couple times a week beyond just his podcast, and I guess we sound like a bunch of old hens, but the thing we talk about all the time is where to publish. And Chris and I, I'll come across something, I'll find a link and a call, and I'll send it to Chris, and vice versa. But we're constantly talking about the fact that there are fewer and fewer places to get fiction published or erotica published in general. But and we're keeping our eyes out all the time, and we do cold calling and all that kind of stuff. But there's fewer and fewer places now, and but which I find interesting, because with the advent of something like 50 Shades of Grey, where that exploded, and everybody and their mother was reading that book, and mainly it was mothers reading the book. But I would think that even from a purely commercial standpoint, you'd say, well, you know what? I want to open an erotic publishing house because this is really popular now. But we didn't see that happen. So do you think we hit a critical mass? Is that what happened? Why are we not? I was wondering why we don't see it as much fiction
I think that's
published.
an excellent way of thinking about it. I really do. I think it's an excellent way of thinking about it. In fact, one of our mutual friends and publishers was talking to me about this recently, and they said that that what happened was when the first advent of ebook readers, Kindle and so forth, there was this explosion of erotica. And because it was one of the hottest things, because you could read it in private. Right. So you could be on the train and reading a smut book and no one would know, versus having a copy of Love's Torrid, Intercourse on your lap. That's not going to fly. So it exploded. I mean, it's like books were being published left and right, and then 50 Shades kicked that off even more. But I think what happened is it oversaturated the market. Okay. So, it's like so many things were being published and so many books were being released that it kind of like created this a hurricane of erotica, which means that no one was actually making money. And the problem with that then is that a lot of publishing companies went out of business.
Yeah,
and
we know for
without them, there's no anthologies. And without anthologies, there's not a huge market for short stories. And some of the websites hung on there. But, when you're looking for arousal, websites are, you don't go to websites to read. But yeah, that's the thing. It's like, now mostly short stories are with certain websites, a few anthologies, but also mostly I think it's being done to assemble into personal collections or offered as one-shot stories on places like, Kindle and so forth. So you'll see, like, if you go to Amazon, you'll type in erotica, you'll see sometimes, like, people are selling stories for like $1 or something similar.
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. And I think that, I know a couple of places that will accept short story collections, but I find unless if we have a good relationship with the publisher, that's one thing. But at the level I'm at, my name doesn't have that much of a value in a certain way. So a new short story collection from Ralph Greco Jr. doesn't mean as much as if I could take that short story collection from Ralph Greco Jr. and theme it in some way. So all the stories are themed in some way. So they're all about that, or they're all about this, And I think I find I'm getting published more. My short story collections that I have out there usually have some sort of a theme to them.
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent idea. That's really the way to go.
Yeah.
Completely agree. I mean, it's like, even someone who's quote unquote a big writer, still you want to keep it on a theme. I mean, it could be anything. So if anybody's out there thinking about doing this, it's a good idea to keep writing. And if you want to try and do this, always try and pick a theme. And it could be science fiction, it could be Westerns, it could be whatever. Mm-hmm. Just as long as they kind of fit into a loose thematic category. And it could also just be like, it could be like science fiction. It could be, it could be horror or something like that. But just jumping around like crazy, that's going to drive readers crazy because, they want to pick up a book and kind of like know a little bit of what's going to happen. So if it's, it's a Western book, then they know it's going to be Westerns. But yeah, it's an excellent point because just random anthologies don't really do all that great.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a name, I guess is one thing. But even like when you read, you go to like an anthology or a short story collection of Stephen King stories, they generally, he's sticking to a theme. Well, he is predominantly a horror writer, I guess you'd say. So a lot of his stuff is that. But I mean, even he has a theme to his collections. Sometimes they're centered around one big story, or but he's a bad example because he is almost exclusively a genre writer. But I don't see short story. I mean, I guess there are. I take that back. I do see short story collections from what I would consider mainstream straight writers that are just kind of just collections. But these writers have names for themselves, and they can do that. And again, I don't know how well those books are selling either. I don't know.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like there's no way of telling. I mean, when you look at like Amazon or any place for that matter, they're always like some books will be labeled as bestseller. And, Amazon has its own criteria for doing that. And it's very confusing and very complex. And there's certain tricks you can do. And, it becomes kind of like a publisher buzzword where, both of us could be considered best selling. But when you ask about what and why, we kind of dance around it.
Right,
but, it's like, and, once again, it doesn't necessarily mean anything. It just sometimes means that the person doing it has like spent an enormous amount of time marketing or pushing their work, in other ways to get it pushed up there. So it can definitely affect sales, but it's also, I think sometimes it's a lot of work, to try and get up there. And sometimes it's also just dumb luck. I mean, you get picked up on the right podcast, the right reviewer, and there you go. But yeah, it's really kind of a big game, and that's the headache because, to like do this, we've talked about this before. There's like two different schools of this. I think the first one is like we're talking about before, is where you work on, writing stories or novels and getting it out there and pushing and pushing and pushing and being a social media maven and, hiring publicists and knowing how to, play the Kindle game. And the other is kind of what we do, which is we love to write fiction and we always love doing it more than anything. But it also opens up doors to things like nonfiction writing. While I definitely would want our books to sell well, they're kind of more like marketing tools to get our name out there so we can get other projects. So it's kind of a different approach to it because I still remember getting royalty checks and it's like double digits. It's like, oh boy,
Yeah. Well, I think what you're talking about is something we keep going back to this, how writing is like every other business.
Exactly.
We're in the middle of a thing where in this day and age where things work synergistically and one thing leads to another in a lot of cases. So in our case, we have this podcast, we have our books together, we have our books separately, we have our teaching, whether we do it live or on some sort of virtual platform. We would also do lectures if we were presented with that opportunity, and we would consult. We would do nonfiction. We would do fiction. So I don't think we're obviously better looking and more talented than most people, but that goes regardless of that, we're no different than anybody else. We're just trying to extend the tendrils as far as we can, so the opportunities come, and not every opportunity is going to be we're going to be able to do or take on or even worthwhile for us. But we just want to have as much out there, floating out there, that if something comes in that is interesting, oh, we could do that, yeah, but that's part of that. Well, let's do that, you know. And I think that what you're talking about is kind of, and I guess the word is synergistic. It's kind of bringing it all in as much as you can, and
exactly.
We try to do that with, like you said, there are times when I know you have said this, like, you know, we go to a convention and we'll get like maybe 10 books printed for the convention each, and it's almost like we don't sell the books all that much, but we've certainly given the books to the convention organizer because it was kind of like a resume. Hey, by the way, take the book. You know, I know I've been there when we both have handed the book to somebody, you know, because we were like, well, this is kind of the calling card, you know. So hoping that it'll jump off in some other way, you know.
Exactly. And that's the thing. It's like, it's kind of like like I said, a business card or a resume. And, you know, because rather than trying to like focus on selling the individual books, we're just focusing on, once again, the name out there. So like you said perfectly, it's branching out for other things. Right. So, you know, it's very different approaches. I mean, I think, you know, because neither one of us, even though we are talking about how fabulous we are, and we
it's
smell like peaches, and you know, we're just like, you know, the people are so fortunate to bask in our glory.
I know, I can't believe it. I envy you listening. That's how I always say it.
And,
you know?
And I do have to say that the offerings and the alms have been really down lately. So you guys have got to get out there and deliver, because you don't want to displease. But you know, it's like we're both kind of shy. You know, I mean, you know, so, you know, it's like, I have to. So so I'm on social media talking about how fab I am, but I don't really like doing it. You know, part of me just says, look, just, you know, give me gigs and writing assignments. That's all I want. So it's hard to do publicity and marketing when you have that kind of mindset. Yeah. So what we do kind of fits our style better, because, you know, we don't have to stand up there on stage and say how fabulous we are, and, you know, get on Twitter all the time and say, you know, like, here's you know, you should be worshiping me. So, you know, it works for us. Let's put it that way. Yes, I wish my books would sell more, but at the same time, it's like how much work I'm really willing to put into it. And I've never wanted to be in a position, and I don't want to speak for you, Ralphie, so definitely feel free to disagree, but I just want to be able to write what I want to write, and not spend like all my days doing marketing and publicity.
So, absolutely, you know, absolutely. No,
I would always prefer to be doing writing. So
yeah. And I mean, I'm very comfortable in those situations where we have presented like a writing class specifically. We've done a lot of different kinds of classes. We've done tit torture. We've done cupping for arousal. We've done you know, impact play. We've done a lot. But and usually I'm usually the ringmaster, and Chris is the doer. He's definitely more knowledgeable and has a sense of those things than I do. So we work very well off each other for an hour and a half class. But I'm most comfortable in our writing classes, and in those instances, we have had a lot of fun. In fact, the first class we ever taught together was in St. Louis, if you remember, and I believe it was a tit torture class, and we were getting everything together on the table or whatever they provided with us. And as we were like turning around and talking and getting things together, I look at you and go, Chris, there's a lot of fucking people in this room. And there was a lot of fucking people in that room. And I remember one point we both turned around and we're like, holy shit, there's a lot of people in this room, you know? And it was amazing how many people were in that room. And we were kind of like, it was like, well, into the fire, you know, out of the fire into the frying pan, or whatever it is, out of the frying pan into the fire. Either way, there was a lot of fire, and we had a great time in that class. But man, there was a lot of people in that class.
That was wonderful.
So, although I don't know if that's my if I'm most comfortable in that arena, I'm probably more comfortable sitting down writing and being by myself, like you are, or being in the studio putting a song together. But when it comes to performance, for want of a better word, I think we do step it up. I think we're adept enough at that to do it well. I think you know, I guess because we're comfortable with each other and we're comfortable with the material.
Exactly. Yes, I completely agree. I think it's like, it's funny because you're more of an extrovert than I am, because you can actually perform, and do performances both,
Yeah.
as a musician and so forth. I like doing it too, but I have to sort of like measure it out. So if I do like a class with you, or I'm doing something like that, I'm always it takes like a day to recover, because it's a lot of energy to go out there. But it's one of those things. Again, it's like, that's part of that whole different direction in writing, because some people really like that. So they do a lot of readings, they do a lot of performances, they do a lot of classes. And, for us, it's one of those fun things to do, but it's not really the focus.
No,
it's something,
not.
it's the cherry on top, put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of the result of hard work and hanging out, and which is something we love to do anyway. And it's like, we've had this talk about this podcast as well. To do this in front of people live somewhere would be a blast. We'd have a great time doing it, and we welcome the opportunity. But first and foremost, it's got to come from the work, and the work has got to be there. So you have to have the thing first. You have to have the podcast. You have to have the book. You have to have known how to write. You have to be able to play guitar sufficiently. All those things before you can go out there and try to perform. For want of a better term.
Exactly. And again, I think there's way too much focus these days about when someone wants to be a writer, they automatically leap to the professional. It's like there's a lot of work that has to take place before you can make that jump. Then and a lot of life experience too, because as we've talked about before, it's like there's a lot of management, a lot of knowing how to talk to people, knowing when to fight and when not. That just only comes with experience. And while we've written a lot of really good books on how to do erotica writing, there's a lot of that stuff that only can come from experience. So you just kind of like got to take your time, don't rush, don't think about the money when you're starting out. Don't think about agents, don't think about self-publishing, just write, and, do it, a lot of it, as much as possible. And also kind of like, I think it also kind of helps ground you a little bit, so when you do make that step, it's not quite so painful, because it's going to be painful. I mean, getting rejected is never fun.
Yeah, and it's true too about life experience is really important, not just because the amount of you're a 22-year-old as opposed to a 42-year-old, your sexual experiences are probably more as you get older and more diverse. Not always, but just generally speaking. Maybe you've tried a lot bit more, experimented more, or I don't know. But the point is that experience is a big thing when it comes to anything. And I always think this because I get a constant barrage of, look at this 11-year-old kid play guitar. And the kid's a prodigy. He's fantastic, right? I mean, he's has great skills and dexterity, but I'm always left wanting because there's no there. He hasn't lived long enough to be giving me any kind of, I don't want to say soul, because I don't believe in that, but he hasn't lived long enough. So I don't know if you're going to be able to deliver for me what I need as my age, just through dexterity alone and skill. You have to have life experience, and that's true of everything across the board. And I think you're right, and that's one of the big things with writing, especially writing erotica. You have to have lived the life a little bit. I mean, there's
exactly. Yeah, you have to have that kind of dimension in there. I mean, it's funny because, like, one of the biggest misnomers I think about erotica is people think it's formulaic. Now, agreed, certain places do want a certain thing, and like, for instance, if you're writing for an anthology, they're going to reject you if you don't deliver what they want.
Yes.
Thinking of it as being a formula is going to get you shot down faster than anything else, because it's never that. In fact, you and I both have had the experience where we will get good feedback or get a story accepted because we're doing something that's different. In other words, not focusing necessarily on the mechanics, but focusing on the emotions, or making the story bittersweet rather than always happy ending kind of things, or even making it horror or something similar. So mixing it up and having fun with the writing process and making it your own will actually serve you better than trying to, like, okay, I have to write exactly to this thing and exactly in this way, and the sex comes at the end, and you have to include every sex act, and you have to go into pages and pages of description. It's like, again, it depends on the market, but by and large, that kind of formulaic thinking, it's not going to fly.
I agree. And I think, and again, this is what we talk about all the demystification of it. This is what Chris is talking about. Is the nuts and bolts of doing it. It's not waiting for the muse to come and tickle your taint and and get you there, because you're going to be waiting a long time, or thinking, just because I do it, it's wonderful and somebody's going to want it. And that's another.
Oh yes.
Another mistake.
That's another biggie.
Yeah,
that's another biggie.
Just because I happen to open my mouth or put things to paper, it's already gold.
Exactly. It's like, oh, fantastic. It's like, oh, give me a break. I mean, it's like everybody gets rejected. That's part of the game, and you don't know. Sometimes but sometimes you have no clue why you got rejected.
Right.
And a lot of it can do with all kinds of different factors, but it is kind of part of the job, and it's not fun, not by a long shot, but it is, like, again, part of the job. I mean, it happens. I do wish writers would be more open about how much of a pain in the ass being a writer can be, because because writers are liars. That's our job. I mean, we're professional hoodwinkers, so that we can convince you that we're something we're not, is what fiction is all about. So sometimes when writers talk about what it is like being a writer, professionally, they don't like to talk about the bad stuff, because one, it makes them look like they're whiny. Two, they want to talk about how wonderful they are, because that's how you make yourself feel better.
Yeah.
But the reality is that everybody gets rejected. Everybody has really dark times. Everybody has agents that don't call them back, or don't have agents, or publishers who drop them, or get bad reviews, and then you don't sleep well for weeks because of the bad review on Amazon. And it's just, and you feel you have imposter syndrome, or you cry yourself to sleep every night. That's the reality of being a writer. I mean, and you don't know why things happen. I mean, it's like, you rarely get any kind of feedback from something. I mean, if you get a story published, they'll often say why they like it, but no one really takes the time to tell you why they didn't. So you have no clue what you did wrong. And it can be simply everything from nepotism, to, they don't like the character names you used or something like that. It's very frustrating.
It is. And I think, again, that's the reality. That's what we've been talking about here on this show here on Licking Non-Vanilla, and we're almost at the end. But we have been talking about the reality of writing, and a little bit about the reality of writing erotica, but about the reality of writing, which we were hoping would prompt you to explore the reality of what you do, no matter what it is, whether it's writing or whatever it is. Because I think there are realities, good and there's good and bad in every pursuit we try. Rejection and long, lonely nights where you doubt yourself, and there's also high triumphs. So we hope that most of your times are taken up with high triumphs, of course. But as always, Chris, it's been a hoot and a half being with you and doing another show with you. It's been wonderful.
Always wonderful. Always fantastic. Looking forward to the next one for sure.
Absolutely. Well, we thank you very much. This is Ralph Greco Jr., and that's M. Christian.
Oh, sorry.
He forgot his name there for a second. Anyway, Ralph Greco Jr. and
M. Christian.
Right. And this is Licking Non-Vanilla. We'll see you next time, kids. Take it easy. Thank you, Chris. Bye-bye.
Take care.
And visit us on the web at www.lickingnonvanilla.com.